Well, I know you've all seen James's Ghostbusters reviews already, but there's a few Ghostbusters games that I found laying around down here that weren't included, so I thought we should take a quick look. The Ghostbusters games that I knew growing up were the ones for Atari 2600 and NES, which were both basically the same game. In fact, the first NES game I owned, besides Mario Duck Hunt, was Ghostbusters. What an appropriate introduction to the console, right? At the time, I had a friend that had Ghostbusters 2, though I didn't own it myself. I didn't really want that one because the first game left a sour taste in my mouth, and I wasn't a die-hard fan of the movie. I thought it was okay, but not worth spending $50 on. However, I did love the cartoon show, The Real Ghostbusters, and I used to always wonder why Nintendo didn't make a game out of the cartoon show. I didn't find out until later that they did in fact release a Real Ghostbusters related game, but it was only for the Game Boy. So, it was a surprise when I found out about that. Then soon after, I came to find out that there was yet another Ghostbusters game for the NES that I never even knew about, but this time for good reason. The new Ghostbusters was released in Europe only, which is why it flew right past my PKE meter, and I didn't know about it. So I'd say it's about time I take a look at all these lost Ghostbusters games from my past and see what they were like. So here we have The Real Ghostbusters for Game Boy. This was made by the same people who brought you all those notoriously repetitive Crazy Castle puzzle games. The game doesn't have a lot of connections to anything Ghostbusters related other than the fact that you play as Peter Venkman and you have a proton pack. Well, sort of. The proton stream looks more like if you held out a lightsaber and jabbed it into the floor than a proton beam. You don't even use the beam to catch ghosts. You drop bombs to blow the ghosts up. How wrong is that? You're supposed to need special equipment to destroy a ghost. No thought went into this. You use your beam to blow up tiles and collect little stars that give you keys to open doors. And that's what every level consists of. It's unvaried and it's tiresome, just like the Crazy Castle games. And there's almost no variety to the enemies that you fight. There's either these little guys that look like witches, or there's this ghost, and that's it. At least the Crazy Castle games had a larger mishmash of Looney Tunes characters chasing after bugs. They weren't even trying with this. There's one boss fight if you make it all the way to the end where you try and trap a large ghost inside some bricks, and yeah, exciting, right? There's just nothing interesting to say about it, which sadly is the case for the entire game. It's just a huge disappointment if you're a Ghostbusters fan. So anyway, at least now you know not to waste your time with it. Let's move on. Next, there was the new Ghostbusters, released by HAL, the makers of the Lolo and Kirby games, in 1991. Not only is this game way better than that crappy Game Boy game that I just showed you, but it's also a vast improvement over the lackluster Activision NES titles that us Americans grew up with. For one thing, you can actually choose which Ghostbuster you want to be, and they include all 4 Ghostbusters. Yes, even Winston. Though I think they needed to watch the movies again because they made him blue. But better yet, you can even choose Rick Moranis' character, Louis Tully. That would have blew my mind as a kid, because he was always my favorite character from the movies. If not simply for the fact that he mentioned Mario Brothers in the second movie.
So you want to play Boggle or Super Mario Brothers?
That may seem like no big deal now, but back then, hearing the words Mario Brothers during an actual movie in the theater was like having a nerdgasm. So you have all these characters to choose from, but you can only choose 2 at a time. One Ghostbuster uses the proton beam, while the other sets the traps. To anyone who's ever seen the second film, you should find all the locations very familiar. There's the courthouse, where you fight the Scoleri brothers, the subway with runaway carts that pop out of nowhere, the sewers that are overflowing with pink slime, the museum, and Dr. Venkman's apartment building. This level's a real pain because you have to go up 5 flights of floors fighting off Jigglypuff impersonators, and it gets really repetitive. There's endless assortments of ghosts to catch, and it's a lot of fun, but it just goes on forever, and it becomes so repetitive. The variety of ghosts is impressive, though. There's a Leatherface type ghost with a chainsaw, a green troll-like monster, and all the ghosts are animated to do different things. For example, Slimer will throw food and metal carts at you. One thing that's a bit annoying is that you're forced to catch every single ghost. The door to progress won't open unless you rid the entire room of all the slimy foes. I wouldn't mind this, except for the fact that there's a limited amount of continues. So if you die, you're going to find yourself back at the beginning of the game, and you're going to have to go through the whole thing over again, which makes the game unnecessarily difficult. Also, another thing that gets annoying is that sometimes player 2 will get stuck behind and he won't be able to join up with you. You'll be left standing there roping a ghost with nobody there to trap it. So you'll have to walk back and get the computer player unstuck. In fact, most of the time when you're killed, it's the computer's fault because player 2 isn't standing in the right position to catch the ghost. It'll have you screaming, "It's not my fault!" repeatedly at the television. The final bosses include a giant-headed Janosch and finally Vigo. But good luck making it there on only 3 continues because this game is harder than the stone lions outside of the New York Public Library. There was a Real Ghostbusters arcade game made in 1987. It was ported to many different consoles like the Amiga, ZX Spectrum, and Commodore 64. I have the Commodore version here. I remember playing the arcade game a long time ago, and I have nostalgic memories of that, but as a game it was nothing too special. It was fun just because it was Ghostbusters, but the gameplay was like playing Akari Warriors. Very repetitive, but there's at least a different boss at the end of each level to make you want to keep playing. Overall though, the Commodore version is just a lesser port with worse graphics and music. It's not really worth playing. And finally, I want to talk about Extreme Ghostbusters for the Game Boy Advance. For those that are unaware, Extreme Ghostbusters was an animated television series that aired around 1997. It was set years after the events in the Real Ghostbusters and stars a new group of characters. There's an introduction sequence where they give you a plot explanation, and it has crappy still frames of Egon and Janine that look like they were done in MS Paint. The plot of this game is that a count kidnaps 2 of the Ghostbusters team, and the remaining Ghostbusters, Eduardo and Kylie of the Extreme Ghostbusters, race to rescue their friends from the evil vampire menace. Pretty corny, but whatever. I really only care about how the gameplay is, so let's take a look. There's driving stages, and then there's platforming stages. You start off and you drive to your destination in the Ecto-1, and you're driving around collecting clocks. That's something I'd expect from a Back to the Future game, not Ghostbusters. Hell, even the NES game knew enough to have you catching ghosts. When you get to the building, it goes to platforming style gameplay. You switch between characters by hitting L. 2 of the characters have different abilities. The girl jumps really high, and the guy has a powerful beam. It kind of reminds me of Super Mario Bros. 2. Luigi jumps high and Toad is strong. But you know, why would Egon equip her with a less powerful proton pack? Does he have something against her or something? Speaking of these characters, the 2 that you're trying to save are Roland and Garrett. A black guy and a guy in a wheelchair. It just doesn't seem right to me that those are the 2 characters that they left out of the game. I think it's a little bit offensive that they chose to omit those characters from the game. Why not make Egon the one that you're trying to save? Well, I guess they were too busy filling in his jumpsuit with the Microsoft Paint bucket to consider that. I have to say, I think the level of difficulty is just right in this game. It can get challenging, but it doesn't get so hard that it's impossible. They at least got the balance right in the game. The controls are very basic and they're easy to use. The graphics are decent, and it seems like they put some extra care into the background, so there are some positives. But what I really don't like is the camera. When you stop to turn around, the screen wobbles around and it makes you feel like you want to puke. Even when you fire your weapon, the screen moves around. What's the point of jerking the screen all over the place like this? It makes me nauseous. Another thing that sucks is the music. This is one of those TV on mute, throw on a CD games. And you want some Ghostbusters atmosphere? Put on the Happy Hamsters Ghostbustin' album.
We're out here to bust ghosts, and I'm not talking about Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Oh god, no, don't do that. The main thing I don't like about the game is just the fact that you're not playing with the actual Ghostbusters from the films. I don't care, I want it to be either Peter, Ray, Egon, Winston, or Lewis. They're the real Ghostbusters to me, and I don't like all those other phonies. That's how I feel, at least. But if you can get past that fact, the game is okay. It has its flaws, and it's certainly nothing special. But you know, had this game been released for the NES, I think we would have thought it was awesome. However, this is Game Boy Advance, so you'd expect something better. There was also Ghostbusters 2 on Game Boy, but that's just mostly the same as the new Ghostbusters, with worse graphics. Out of all the retro Ghostbusters games, the new Ghostbusters is certainly worth playing, but you're best off probably playing the Ghostbusters game on Genesis. Genesis does what Nintendo don't.